Hi, guys, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me for a quick conversation on access to capital in Kansas City and also for entrepreneurs around the country in the age of COVID. So I'm so pleased that you were able to take the time to join us today. Maybe let's start by each introducing ourselves.
I'll start off. Ruben Alonso. I'm the president of AltCap. We're a community development financial institution here in Kansas City. I've been fortunate enough to be the steward of AltCap for the last 12 years and have seen the organization grow from what started out as just kind of a specialized tax credit financing institution to a small business micro-lending CDFI.
Good morning. My name is Chris Evans. I'm the president of T-Shirt King Incorporated. We're a family-owned business. My parents started it in 1985. I've been the president since 2004. T-Shirt King specializes in decorated apparel as well as promotional products. So we work with everything from sports teams, schools, churches, businesses, local government, small businesses.
Awesome. Thanks. And I'm Melissa Roberts-Chapman. I lead the Heartland strategy here at the Kauffman Foundation. And that's really our efforts to grow and elevate the entrepreneurial community in what we call the Heartland region. For us, that includes the states of Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas. And oftentimes you'll hear me call them the Mink states or the Mink region. So when we think about diverse communities, my home state of Kansas may not always be at the top of the list for people around the country, but those of us who live here know that our reality is somewhat different than popular imagination. And from the history of this region to the entrepreneurs that are shaping our economy today, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, immigrant, and intersectional communities are a really important part of what makes the Heartland what it is. But the hard truth I think that we have to tell is that today, not everyone in this region has the same access to the resources that they need to start and grow a business here. The entrepreneurs in the Heartland report that getting access to capital to start and grow businesses is more of a challenge here than it is nationally. And so if you're asking yourself why, you've come to the right place, because that's exactly what we're going to deep dive into today. Chris, tell us about the story, of how you got interested in business, about how you kind of found your way into the family business and what that process was like.
So growing up, I was 8, 9 years old when my parents started the business, and I kind of always had that entrepreneurial itch growing up. Went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, graduated from there, worked in management consulting for several years. And then I went to University of Michigan Business School. Well, then I thought I would explore investment banking. So during my first year of business school, went to an interview in New York on Wall Street, flew home for spring break, and came and spent the week working with my dad in the business. He was ready to retire from the business, and he said, "Hey, come just check it out, spend the week with me." So I spent the week with him and kind of fell in love with it and decided, this was probably the least risky time in my life. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, and said if I ever wanted to do something entrepreneurial, it'd probably be now. I'm used to college living. So I returned back to school, turned down the internship on Wall Street, and decided I was going to quote unquote intern with the family business. So I spent that summer, 3 months working in the family business. My father let me jump right in. And one of the things that was cool about our business is it wasn't that typical power struggle of the young guy coming in. It was, hey man, here it is, it's yours. If you want it, take it, run with it, have at it. In all honesty, it was more of a hobby before I came on board. Both my parents had full-time jobs, and this was money they used to help pay for college and family trips and things like that. I spent that second year of business school kind of planning, how could I grow the business? What would be the strategic ways to grow it, get customers, and fulfill orders? And that really made my business school experience pretty cool because I had a built-in case study, if you will, of being able to apply that technical knowledge to an actual business. So that helped me out tremendously. I figured I was more on knew the business side and had to learn the art and the creative side of T-shirts. So that's kind of what got me into it. I fell in love with just the community connection of the T-shirt business. People think of it as just T-shirts, but you talk to politicians, you talk to high school principals, you talk to business owners, you talk to sports coaches. So it runs the gamut and it's very diverse.
So in that vein of kind of running a family business and stepping in, what's the most rewarding part and the most challenging part of working in a family business?
The rewarding part is, people really start to know you in the community. There's times, especially in the summer, that we feel like we're kind of connected to all the events that are going on in the city. So, depending on what we're printing, we know when there's a festival, we know when there's a 5K race, we know when somebody's having a 50th anniversary, when a church is celebrating an anniversary. So really being connected to that community is pretty cool. Then on the family side, your younger cousins and your nieces and nephews, they always come around the business or whatever, but just seeing that they have an appreciation and a respect for somebody that owns a business, and it comes out a little later in life when they say, well, can I get a summer job, or can I help out on the weekends? What can I do to earn some money? Or I'm thinking about starting a business. We do a lot of family reunions, and we're probably on the third or fourth generation of, family trees that we have in our database of artwork. And, you work with the great grandmother, and my dad worked with the grandmother. And now I'm working with, the current generation and the younger ones. So having that connection with families is pretty cool too.
Ruben, I want to hear a little bit more about your background too. How, of all of the many different things you can do in the world of finance, how the heck did you end up in a CDFI in Kansas City? Tell that story.
Yeah, good question. It was like Chris, Wall Street was in my future. I started with Solomon Smith Barney out of college, doing corporate accounting, corporate finance. But at the end of the day, accounting, corporate finance just wasn't my destiny. So burned all my suits and joined the Peace Corps, and did that for a couple years. And when I finished that, I came back to the States, got a master's degree in public policy, focusing on economic development. I ended up working for a minority business development center in LA. So got introduced to the challenges minority businesses have in terms of accessing, capital, contracting, and really just the things that they need to kind of grow as a business. As I looked to kind of see what the next step would be after leaving LA. So ended up here in Kansas City, was working for the city of Kansas City, Missouri, doing development finance, and was introduced to the opportunity to kind of take this organization that was created, AltCap. It was, dormant at the time, but it was created to initially bring new markets tax credits to Kansas City. That's really where AltCap kind of cut its teeth around, this whole alternative finance world and getting involved in bringing capital to capital-starved communities and businesses that are not able to access capital. So we kind of took that experience and leveraged that to start doing micro lending, small business lending. So that's where we are today, and that's just really been a big part of the organization, and just the passion of everybody who works for AltCap. You mentioned racial justice, and for us, a big part of that is economic justice, closing the wealth gap in the U.S. To us, has a lot to do with closing the Black wealth gap, which I think has seemed to really have a huge impact in communities in terms of economic empowerment and wealth building and generational wealth.
Yeah, Ruben, so you've talked about your team and the amazing group of people that you work with a couple of times. Tell us a little bit more about them.
Yeah, they're just really great colleagues, great friends. I mean, just the passion that they bring every day, the energy that they bring every day. They've worked so hard to get us to where we are now. We've had a really intense experience the last 3 months, standing up this COVID-19 loan fund and really trying to help as many small businesses as possible. I want to share a picture of them, one, just to show you the team, but also show you the high quality t-shirts that Chris Evans produces at T-Shirt King.
I love it.
Yeah, so that's beautiful. Thanks.
Yeah, this is my team. A few weeks ago, decided to give them each Superman and Wonder Woman t-shirts, just to show my appreciation for the incredible work they did over the last 3 months. And, they're my heroes in terms of what they were able to accomplish and all the small businesses that they were able to support.
That is so great. And Chris, I want to hear about, when you stepped into the business, when you took over the family business in those early days, how did you start making decisions about, how you were going to finance the business, about the banking relationships that you were going to pursue?
Initially, we were with the local bank, and this was in 2004. So we used to spend a lot of time traveling to sorority and fraternity conventions around the country. So it was very easy to make deposits in a national bank instead of carrying cash in a van with T-shirts. It was a little bit risky. So being able to make those deposits in different cities was a huge factor. So it was technology and accessibility in the beginning. And at the time, some of the local banks, smaller local banks, just didn't provide that. So that was a huge factor for us early on in the business. As far as accessing capital, I mean, Black people have just had a tough time with banks dating back from, post-slavery and the Great Depression, and, our deposits not being insured and depositing money, and now it's gone because the bank went under. So that mistrust of banks has been something that's passed on, unfortunately, from generation to generation to generation. And a lot of times, Black businesses, including ours, you end up, because of that stigma with banks, whether you never really know. When you're denied, you don't know if you're really denied, or is it a racial thing, or you don't 100% know one way or the other. But I know that it's always easy to get a credit card. So a lot of times we finance our businesses through credit cards and figure, in that urgent moment where you have this big order of 3,000 or 4,000 T-shirts and you don't have that cash to pay for them, you put it on a card, doesn't necessarily all get paid off. Now you have these high interest payments because you didn't have that traditional financing. The challenge becomes then once you do go to the bank, they say, well, you have a lot of personal debt, credit card debt. So that kind of puts you in the cycle of now they're definitely denying you because of your personal debt, but in your mind, it's business debt. So that cycle is something that happens in our community much too often. And unfortunately, like, credit cards are probably the most friendly. Then you have, payday loans that people use and things, just all kinds of expensive ways to finance their business.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And I think on top of all of the things that you just listed, community banking is changing in this time.
Right.
People talk a lot about banking regulation and how that's forced consolidation among community banks. But I think one of the things that's really important about that is every time a community bank closes a branch, you lose hundreds of relationships with members of the community, with business owners in the community. And here in this region, community banking is extremely important. So, we sit in the 10th Federal Reserve District. 95% of the banks here are community banks. But as that consolidation has happened, it's really had an impact on communities that have been systemically left behind. An example, between 2006 and 2016, the number of Black-owned banks, or technically FDIC depository institutions, was cut almost in half. So in late 2016, there were only 24 Black-owned banks left across the entire country. And I think this is really, in my mind, where CDFIs come in. CDFIs are designed to fill this gap. They're regulated differently. They're built to build partnerships with banks to help realize a community impact. And so, Ruben, can you speak to some of the specific ways that CDFIs, work with banks, using AltCap and your experience as an example?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of, that point about consolidation. I mean, you've lost a lot of banks over the last 10 years. And it's definitely had an impact on access to capital for a lot of communities. You've just lost that physical presence in those communities. And, one of the, things about AltCap is we've always made sure to kind of locate in the communities that we wanted to serve and make an impact in. To Chris's point, I mean, there's still redlining going on in maybe more subtle ways, but we see that in terms of just our interaction with businesses and kind of listening to them and hearing kind of the challenges that they face accessing capital, getting a business bank loan, but then also just as we approach banks with even a real estate project, how they look at a certain part of town and how that kind of factors into their underwriting of a potential commercial real estate loan. In terms of how we, specifically work with banks, we started out doing a lot of participation loans with banks through our tax credit financing. We've continued that a little bit with our small business and micro lending. We get a lot of referrals from banks now, being a micro lender. So that's a really important relationship for us. We always tell our banking partners, hey, don't say no, say AltCap. If you can't lend to that business, send them to us. We'll figure out a way to lend to them, especially when it comes to microloans, under $50,000. Most banks, really don't even want to deal with loans that size anyway. There's a business and kind of economic value to banks working with us, but there's also a CRA or Community Reinvestment Act benefit there as well. So we try to leverage that as much as possible.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point. The CRA legislation created in the 70s, drastically expanded in the 90s in direct reaction to some of these systemic failures like redlining that led to the widening of that wealth gap over time. Can you speak to a little bit about how CRA, is intended and how it impacts your work today?
So Community Reinvestment Act, it was created to essentially trying to address, the redlining that existed in terms of bank lending practices over the years, making sure that they are lending to all communities in their market. CDFI industry or community kind of grew out of the civil rights movement, kind of recognizing certain inequities and disparities and injustices around specific communities. We were kind of seen as a way to address some of that by helping to bring resources to communities that were underserved, overlooked by banks, financial institutions.
Chris, you've talked about that brand and trust of the banking system that runs generations deep. And Ruben, you've talked about the importance of those relationships. Spell it out for us. How does having that relationship inform your lending and underwriting process? How is that process different than a traditional bank? And Chris, how did that relationship with AltCap show up for you?
Hearing things on the news, everything's shutting down, businesses can't operate. What'll happen? There's that big question mark. And I think I may have received an email or something from AltCap and responded to, complete this information. And prior to that, I had completed information with the SBA and PPP. And, it just kind of, you filled it out and you didn't hear anything. With AltCap being community focused, I filled out the one pager on the website. And the next day, a physical person called me and it was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. So to hear an actual person call me and ask questions about our business was phenomenal. And the fact that they knew of T-Shirt King from just being in the Kansas City community was very, very comforting. Whereas, the bank that I'm with, been there 16 years and I was denied in one click of, we can't do anything for you.
I think that's something that, we had an early signals about, how challenging this whole pandemic was going to be and kind of what role we needed to play. So yeah, just being able to see that early on and kind of get ready to do what we did with the COVID loan fund and get, go back out to businesses that we had worked with. But put out, some type of communication that we can make sure that businesses in the community knew that there was an option for them to reach businesses like Chris and T-Shirt Kings.
Awesome. So, let's go back to that time. Chris, talk about how the shutdown, impacted you and your business, what it was like to be making decisions during that time.
Earlier, I talked about, me enjoying the benefits of online banking and, technology. So we have a lot of utilities and things that automatically come out of our checking account. So one of the first things that I did was go to the bank and actually went into the branch as I was trying to apply for a line of credit and said, hey, look, at some point, if this thing shuts down the way it's going to shut down, our account's going to go negative. So I wanted to make sure that shut off was in place was, one of the first things that I did. Then I spent literally an entire business day calling all of those people that have automatic withdrawals in our account and asking, what are you guys doing for COVID-19? Is there a forbearance or is it delayed payments? Do you give 1 month and then we pay next month? What is the situation? So I got pretty good at staying on hold and calling everybody. Also created a spreadsheet of our suppliers and how much we had that we owed our supplier or would owe our suppliers when the terms came due. So a lot of our suppliers give us 30-day terms on the shirts that we order. And so it's a rolling term. So you always, we typically send weekly payments and just to stay ahead of it. But not operating for, 3, 4, or 2 or 3 months, those terms would come due. And that's where AltCap kind of really stepped in and was that bridge for us of, the money that we got from AltCap, we were able to make good with all of our suppliers immediately. It was good knowing that you went through that process and did everything that you could possibly do to keep your business afloat.
What was the moment where you realized that this was going to be, a long-term, I guess, change? And tell me about that, that realization process and how you personally just processed it.
So we do a fair amount of business with Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, and especially in the spring. And when they called and said, we're sending the kids home for school, so we'll need to cancel these orders, it was like, wow, when has a college ever sent all of the kids home from school? And at that moment, it really became serious. And I think the next email, people in Kansas City know that corporate challenge is a pretty big deal here in the community, where the different corporations participate in an Olympics, if you will, with a bunch of different events. And we do a fair amount of T-shirts for the different corporations to compete in those events. And when they called and said that was canceled, it was like, man, this thing is really serious.
Ruben, I kind of have a similar question for you. What was a moment where you realized the impact that this was going to have on the community? How did you react? What were the first couple of things you did?
We immediately kind of went into kind of communication mode with our clients, our small businesses, working with them to restructure, modify loans, defer payments. Kicking into high gear with the COVID-19 Relief and Recovery Loan Fund was, just our attempt and effort with our partners like Kauffman Foundation and some other civic and business leaders to find a way to ensure that small businesses had access to capital, some sort of financial lifeline once the economy essentially shut down.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about that. What kind of loans were we doing out of the COVID relief and now recovery fund? What's the impact been so far?
I think it's been tremendous, to be able to kind of provide a business, like T-Shirt Kings and all the other businesses. We've lent to over 100 businesses right now, provide them that kind of immediate relief, kind of that breathing room that they needed to get through the last few months and hopefully now kind of on the road to recovery. But it was very, intentionally designed, and that was through, a lot of conversations you and I had and just the rest of the partners for the Relief Recovery Loan Fund. How do we structure this to give them, financing terms that gave them that patient, flexible capital that they can use to kind of recover and hopefully not rebuild. First year is very much kind of a deferred payment, no interest part of the loan. And then it kind of stair steps up years 2 and 3, very low interest rate, 2% and 4.5%. So we feel that 3-year runway, again, with very kind of low cost patient capital, will allow these businesses to take on this debt. And a lot of businesses are very reluctant to take on this debt, but we feel we structure this debt in a way that allowed them to kind of manage that debt and use those funds to address kind of the critical aspects of ensuring that their business can recover from this pandemic.
The thing that I think is so remarkable about the team and the work that y'all have been able to do is, we think back to when the shutdown was first announced. I mean, there was this really 2-week period where, we knew that there was something coming from the federal government someday. You know, there was this like vague hope, but nobody really had guidelines. The money wasn't being deployed. And you guys were on, you know, in the community almost immediately, deploying capital, calling people back, having human conversations. And I remember you saying to me at one point, like, we've almost become like business therapists.
We launched this loan fund late March, and we got money out, you know, after the first week. But that the response was overwhelming. I mean, more than I think even we thought. In the first 72 hours, we had over 600 businesses requesting $30 million in financing. And, you know, we were talking about, you know, standing up at that time, a $3 million loan fund. We've kind of increased that to $5 million, but yeah, it was overwhelming. But to hearing the you know, what those businesses were going through, I mean, it was just something that we felt we had to be there for them. And
I mean, Chris, so like in going through that situation, where'd you turn for support? Where'd you turn for your business therapy?
I mean, you have friends that are also entrepreneurs. Spend a lot of time with my kids and just doing all kind of random things, watching old movies, looking at old pictures. We had a family Olympics. My focus then became, okay, I have 3 months before I have to pay standard bills, including payroll, thanks to PPP. But what debt can we cancel in that time? Because our business did start to pick back up. My focus has been, what can we do to eliminate that and have a more stress-free life? Fortunately, as you mentioned before, when I do my spreadsheets, I could actually have less customers, and just by the mere fact that we have better financing, be more profitable. That's how bad it is in accessing capital. So it made me really come to that conclusion and realize that, you know, we have to make decisions. We may have to sacrifice some things, but we do have to focus on that a little bit more, because when you're in business for as long as we are, you know, the cash kind of flows, and you understand January, February is going to be slow, but we'll pick up March and April, and you kind of play the cycles. And you never really need that rainy day fund. Well, this time it really rained and we really needed it. So, you know, we need to make sure we have that in place as well.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you've hit a reset button.
Yes, definitely a reset.
One of the things that I've heard so often, and it is deeply true, is that, you know, COVID didn't cause problems. It just exposed problems that were endemic in society that we were ignoring. And, right. You know, in the age of COVID, in the age of protests against police brutality, I mean, at no time is that more apparent than today. You know, and so I'm going to run through a list of some facts and figures that kind of illustrate, I think, the systemic challenge. 57% of Black people who applied for credit in 2019 were denied or approved for less than requested. 24% of white people were. That disparity holds at every income level. You know, most business starts, we already know, are financed by personal credit, personal savings, and bank loans. 92% of aspiring entrepreneurs across the country cite funds to start the business or grow the business as a challenge. You know, stack that all on top of some of the things that Ruben alluded to earlier in this conversation. And we've talked about the wealth gap. You know, the Brookings Institution found that, you know, Black household net worth, $17,000 on average, roughly 10% the net worth of the average white household. When you add all that up, and we expect everybody to have the same opportunity at starting a business, it just doesn't work. The math just doesn't work. When we talk about systemic racism, when we talk about the dramatic need for systems change, this list of facts and figures is like what's front of mind for me. But Chris, you have shared some really, really interesting thoughts with me about how this is going to impact Black-owned businesses, you know, how PPP and EIDL has played a role, about how hitting that reset button has been powerful for your business. You know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, how you think this time might change, or hope this time might change, the availability of funding for Black-owned businesses on a larger scale?
honestly, I think some businesses will come out a lot better than they were before. Just for the simple fact of, restructuring your debt can make you a more profitable business. That's just a natural fact. And when you have a subset of people in America that haven't had access to affordable capital, and it's unfortunate that the world literally had to shut down for us to have an opportunity to get financing from institutions where we feel like race isn't such a huge factor. It's unbelievable. Talking to a friend of mine, he owns a construction company in Atlanta, and we were talking about the economic disaster loan process and the information that we provided. And it did take some time, but just it's almost emotional. The fact that they came back and said, you're approved for this amount, how much do you want? And it's like, is this what it's like for other people to go to the bank on a normal basis? And this is kind of a side note, but my dad and I, we had a real estate company a few years back, and he owned his house outright. And we went to the bank and they said that there's no way that you don't have some type of mortgage or rent payment. Prove to us that you don't have a rent payment. Like, how do you prove something that doesn't exist? So those types of things are very real when it comes to banking. And so for me, having gone into banks, and I've been in business long enough where a no doesn't really affect me. It's just business. Okay, you don't like me, I'll go on to the next. But this is the first time I felt like, okay, I can fill out this application like anyone else is filling out this application, and I'm actually getting money. And it didn't hurt me. It didn't test my personal integrity.
And I mean, Chris, you've kind of gotten into this in this last kind of answer, but, obviously you're a Black man. Ruben, right. You're a man of color. How does your lived experience and your identity kind of impact the business that you run? How does it inform your worldview? How does it inform how you run your business, how you engage in the community?
It is who I am and who I've always been. So, W.B. Du Bois talks about the duality of Black people in America, and having to live that duality. That's just the same for business. I mean, for example, I own the business, but if I complete an RFP for a business, I'm talking to a buyer, and you have to have a ton of humility, because there's times where I'm delivering the shirts, and the person I'm delivering to is looking at me as simply a delivery guy, and I get treated like a delivery guy, but I understand, hey, I'm delivering shirts today. They don't even know that, I'm the one that helped design the shirt or create the shirt, produce the shirt, run the business that made the shirt. But, you get treated like the delivery guy. Can it be tiring at times? Yeah, it can. Constantly trying to prove that you're an efficient business, or, you can handle a bulk order or a large order. That is something that you have to go through. It's unfortunate, but it is definitely something that you have to go through.
Ruben, how about you?
I would say just, my personal experience. I come from a big Cuban family, a lot of entrepreneurs in my family. I think the Cuban experience is very different in this country. The hurdles that they faced, the challenges that they faced, I don't think anything compares to what, we're dealing with in the Black community in terms of, the severity of the racism and kind of the injustice that you've seen. If there's a positive to what we've gone through the last few months, just with, the pandemic, civil unrest. I mean, I think it's just really showing a light on just how far we still need to go. That's what keeps us, AltCap, focused on what we do. Again, we're playing a small part, but we truly believe that there's a lot to be said for creating wealth in communities and for kind of economic empowerment through entrepreneurship, and how that can hopefully address some of the disparities there and inequities there, and bring more community economic development to parts of Kansas City that and in the region that have been neglected and just not a priority.
Yeah. So, I mean, before we wrap up this conversation, Chris, I just want to give you this platform for a second. Is there anything else you want to make known about your business, about your community, about how, these last few months have gone for you?
And I realize that our business is probably more fortunate than a lot of businesses. I understand that, but being able to share that there is some positive and some hope coming out of this, making your business more efficient, opening up the lines of communication, and to be able to approach a bank in a more confident manner. Those are small steps that, as a Black business owner, sharing that information is important for aspiring entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs. In so many ways in our communities, the mistrust of the bank, the mistrust of the government, the mistrust of having to pay taxes, the mistrust of, giving so much information that you structure your company in one way or another. I think some of that came out as well, in that, so many companies and businesses that are pillars in the community refuse to, use a payroll service and pay payroll taxes. Therefore, they weren't applicable for PPP. And sharing my story helps you to formalize your business. You could easily pay yourself and not pay taxes. Then when a situation comes around like this, it looks as if you've never made money. So, you don't qualify for unemployment. So helping people to understand that it is important to legitimize your business in order to take that greater leap forward. You have to expose your details in order to be certified as legitimate business in America to a certain extent. And maybe that can help you to get more capital, more access. So I encourage everyone to make sure legally they're structured correctly, have accountants, make sure that they know what they're doing. You're filing your paperwork on time. So in instances like this, God forbid it ever happens again, but you are prepared, or not even if it happens like this, you are prepared to go to a bank. One of the things that really helped us is we had our documents available to be able to get them in time when money ran out. But making sure that your business is structured, you have access to all your paperwork, your EIN number, you can access bank statements, because a lot of times that is the hurdle. That is the hurdle you have to get past of, can you do it?
Yeah, thank you. This is a time when I think there are a lot of people that are watching what's going on in the world and just wondering, how much long-term change we're really going to see in our society when it comes to these issues that we've been talking today, when it comes to racial justice and equity and access to capital. The thing that's so clear to me right now is that the systems that govern our life, they're tainted by this ingrained racism and implicit bias, but it feels like there's a change coming in a way that's different than anything that I've seen in my lifetime and my career. And certainly participating and being involved in this COVID relief fund and the efforts around it, that's been one of the great privileges of my career. It brings to mind the words of the poet Langston Hughes. So, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath America will be. And there's just so much in that of the entrepreneurial mindset and the entrepreneurial experience, and I think the great vision that we can have for our community when entrepreneurial opportunity really truly does become equitable and access to capital does become equitable. So as we wrap up, Ruben, leave us with, a vision of a vibrant future state in which access to capital is plentiful and equitable here in Kansas City. How do our city and our country look different than they do today?
It's key to really, helping to build and sustain thriving communities. And, just listening to Chris's story, I mean, it's always just reinforcing just to kind of hear him talk as an entrepreneur and understand his challenges. Always love to hear the stories about our entrepreneurs who are also just so connected to the community. I know Chris is, just being a business in the community, but also just what he does in terms of supporting the community. I mean, being involved in Lincoln Prep. I remember when I was going around riding my bike, a couple months ago, stopping by Lincoln Prep with my wife and seeing T-Shirt Kings, sponsoring Lincoln Prep there. And I took a picture of that and shared that with all the banks that we were working with, and, reminding them, hey, we're not just supporting a small business here, an entrepreneur, but this is an entrepreneur that deeply cares about his community, and we gotta support those businesses that mean so much to the community, not just in terms of their business and the jobs that they create, but also just the fact that they're in the community, that they send their kids to the public schools in the community, and they're connected to that community. So I think that's where I feel we need to get back to in terms of how we're supporting our community, how banks and financial institutions are supporting their community and being more connected to their community. And our role as a CDFI, being a part of that and continue to kind of grow our relationships with not just businesses but with financial institutions. We're constantly trying to innovate in terms of how we structure our financing to make it more accessible, make it more something that businesses can really use and help them grow. So the more we can kind of increase that flow of capital into communities, I think the better we'll be and the stronger we'll be.
Chris, similar question for you. Leave us with that vision of a vibrant future state in which more people have the opportunity that you've had, that you fought for, that you built. What does that look like? How is our world different?
And Ruben, this is definitely no disrespect to AltCap. Don't take this the wrong way, but we'll know that the world is a better place when there's no need for AltCap.
Yeah.
When you can anyone can go to your traditional lending institutions and be treated fairly and get the financing that they need to operate. So that's one of those things. And it's almost as if, Ruben, you're working to put yourself out of business and educate traditional banking institutions of there's a lot of great businesses out here that deserve a chance, and you guys are overlooking them for whatever reason. So that's kind of where I can see that there's, when that happens, I think things are really working. But in the interim, places like AltCap are definitely filling that void and giving small businesses hope and financing and an ability to just operate. I saw on Instagram a lady was talking and said, when it comes to Black people, if you equate it to a Monopoly game, we went around the board 400 times and never got paid. And now you want us to be able to buy the same things. And then even when we're able to buy the same things, you either stole it from us or you burnt it down, and you still want us to be able to operate equally. So, having that head start, it makes a difference. When you talk about comparing the wealth of a household, when for generation after generation, nothing was passed on except for traditions and recipes, there is no comparison. How can I compare my family's net worth to your family's net worth and you had a 400-year head start? I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but it has to get better. And part of that comes with just the cost of capital. How can my money be more expensive than your money? And you had a head start. And how am I supposed to catch up? How can we have the same credit rating system when nothing was passed to me and things were stolen from my ancestors? How are we compared the same? Fortunately, I think Black people have done an awesome job of adjusting and competing and figuring out a way to get this far. But when you talk about equality and equity and those things, until some of those systemic things kind of go away, it's very, very difficult to catch up.
Well said. Chris, Ruben, I am so grateful that y'all took time out of your day to kind of share your experience, to talk about what you've experienced over the last few months, to talk about your hopes for the future. With people like you leading the way, I'm confident that Kansas City is going to have a bright one. And I hope that over the next 20, 30, 50 years, we can keep working together to make sure that, as Mr. K said, everybody in Kansas City really does have the opportunity to be uncommon. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa. Greatly appreciate it.